Hello, and welcome back. In this lesson, I'm going to introduce you to the topic of story structure. Now, when I say story structure, the first objection that inevitably gets raised is somebody cries, formulaic. They say, no, I am not going to use the story structuring techniques. I am going to be original and write something that has never been done before. Well, chances are you can't actually write something that's never been done before because, as the adage goes, there's nothing new under the sun. But also, story structure is not designed to be formulaic. It is not as though you sit down with the story structure template and crank out identical screenplays. In fact, story structure is a template for you to use to enhance your creativity and come up with something that is even more original than you might have if you just sat down and began typing. So, what does story structure do for you? Well, one that is perhaps the most important is that it keeps your writing on track, and it makes sure you know where you're going. It is very disheartening to get bogged down in the middle of Act 2 and have absolutely no idea what comes next. This frequently happens right around the 30-minute mark, actually. Writers will come up with a brilliant idea, they'll have all of this inspiration, and they'll sit down and begin writing Act 1, and they will construct a beautiful, wonderful, emotionally satisfying Act 1, get to the first turning point, and have absolutely no idea what comes next. And at that point, instead of sitting down and trying to figure it out, those 30 pages end up languishing in a drawer someplace. So, by beginning with structure, you avoid that problem because then as you start writing, you know exactly where you're going and how you're going to get there. And structure also makes sure that the story you're telling connects emotionally with your viewers, which is the most important thing, arguably, that a good storyteller can do. But wait, what about movies like Pulp Fiction, Run Lola Run, or Magnolia? Those don't seem like they follow traditional story structuring techniques at all. Pulp Fiction, in fact, is told sort of almost in concentric circles. But I will say that if you begin to look at where traditional story structuring moments should fall, chances are that at the appropriate time in the movie, there are corresponding emotional highs and lows, as well as plot twists and turns, even though the story is being told chronologically out of order. Run Lola Run is a very interesting German film. It's an 80-minute piece that is broken up into 3 chunks in which the character Lola performs essentially the same action 3 times. Once when she's early, once when she's late, and once when she's right on time. And the ending plays out quite differently in each case, depending on her timing. Now, that certainly does not seem like that fits traditional story structuring at all. However, each individual segment is a miniature structure, complete beginning, middle, and end. And in fact, towards the end of the movie, where the climax of a traditional structure would go, those are when the events are the most intense. And so it actually even fits sort of a larger structure if you take a sort of step back and look at it in terms of rising tension and the character's emotional journey. Those story checkpoints almost work out perfectly as well. Magnolia is a movie that is almost entirely subplots. And in fact, there are so many plots going on, it's difficult sometimes to tell what the main plot is. But each of those subplots, even though they're chopped up and scattered throughout the entire 2-hour movie, they each have complete story structures as well. And some of the stories come together in ways, and again, if you look at the moments where the first turning point should be, that's a moment where there will be a moment that is a game changer for many of the subplots. And they're related enough that one moment will frequently play into many of the other subplots. And as an audience, we may not get to see them all, but we'll get to imagine the way that they're tying together and what the effect that this turning point has on the others as we pick them up in Act 2 going into Act 3. And again, also if you look at the climax, all of the events tie into this thing that happens, this quirk of the weather, that results in climaxes through many of the subplots. So, if you look for story structure in successful films, it is always there. And it is possible it can get much more complicated, as with Run Lola Run, where instead of structuring one movie with a complete story structure, there is actually 3 complete story structures. Again, with the subplots, you'll have as many complete story arcs as there are characters who overcome flaws. Now, not every character in Magnolia is considered a protagonist, because not everyone overcomes their flaw, and not all of the subplots do include complete arcs, but those that do are probably the ones that you remember the most and sympathize the most with those characters. So, what's coming up in the next couple of lessons is an introduction to 4-act structure, which gets talked about in television a lot, but also works for movies, and is kind of 3-act structure in disguise. And then we'll get into really in-depth 3-act structure discussions, where we'll break down each act and talk about the checkpoints that your character goes through in each of those. So I will see you there.